So, The Witcher 3 was a pretty famous game when it came out, and a lot of people had good things to say about it. So, I decided to finally try out the game. And, after playing for a bit, I just felt there was something just not right about it. Again, I can't quite say that The Witcher 3 is a bad game, but, what I did? I reinstalled Skyrim again. Yeah, the game from 2011. The Witcher 3 came out in 2015, so it should be at least as good, if not better, than the game from 2011, right? Especially since the developers of Witcher 3 can play Skyrim first, and kind of see what's right and wrong about that. Well, not really, and I'm going to explain why. The Witcher 3 is definitely not a bad game, but it's not Skyrim. So, let me just kind of run into why Skyrim is so good. Now, a lot of people are going to make the argument that I can't compare modded Skyrim with, a regular game, and I would say no. I mean, the whole point of Skyrim is modding, and mods are easy to get. The second thing is that there's no reason to play Skyrim completely unmodded. I mean, there really isn't, unless you're not on the PC. And who cares if completely unmodded Skyrim isn't that good? It's simply not relevant because we aren't playing completely unmodded Skyrim. Now, we can play Skyrim with few mods. Lightweight mods. Those are fine, but to play Skyrim completely unmodded, it's just, I'm not even going to think about it because what is the point? Completely unmodded Skyrim wouldn't even have Sky UI. So, yes, I mean, if I'm going to compare Skyrim with other games, I have to compare Skyrim that has at least some mods. Again, doesn't have to be a lot of mods or heavy mods, but just at least a few lightweight mods. In addition, Skyrim has the best mod support. In fact, the community even made Mod Organizer just to make Skyrim modding more efficient and more stable. So, if I'm not going to compare unmodded Skyrim because people aren't playing unmodded Skyrim for the most part, to say the least, you're at least going to have Sky UI. Okay, so first let's talk about the combat. So a lot of people criticize Skyrim's combat. I don't know why they criticize it, because it's actually better than most other games. So let's talk about the first problem with most other games' combat. Let's say The Witcher or Dark Souls. The first problem is a stupid dodge mechanic. First of all, there's no such thing as dodge rolling in real life. There just isn't. If you're going to roll on the ground, you're going to get killed. Okay? Skyrim, there's no dodge rolling. No, dodging is physically moving out of the way of attacks. And if you do move out of the way, then yes, people can't hit you. Skyrim also rewards blocking. Blocking is very, very important in Skyrim, such that shields are very important. In fact, that's probably one thing I don't like about the two-hand skill, because two-handed skills, you cannot use a shield with it, and shields are actually really good in Skyrim because blocking is really good. But in real life, shields are also very, very good. So now, why do so many games have dodge rolling, and why is it even a thing in most other games? Well, see, dodge rolling wouldn't make sense at all, but see, the other games, they give dodge rolling invulnerability frames. So when a dodge is executed, the player is invulnerable for that moment. The only reason dodge rolling is even a thing in so many games is because of this invulnerability frame. So dodge rolling would be useless, except the games themselves kind of give you a cheesy way of using dodge rolling to make it viable. It's not realistic, it's not immersive, and it's fundamentally bad game design. The only way to play these games is with dodge rolling, a tactic that didn't even make sense. And plus, dodge rolling is usually the only way to play these games. Now, in Skyrim, there's dodging and there's also blocking, so right there, in Skyrim, you're giving two options to defend yourself rather than just one. Dodging in Skyrim isn't about, hey, I'm going to press one button and now I'm suddenly invulnerable. Dodging in Skyrim involves physically moving out of the way of attacks, and sometimes you might move the way of one attack into somebody else's attack and you get hit anyways. So you cannot just press one button and, oh, I'm invulnerable for a second. That doesn't work in Skyrim. Same with blocking. Blocking is directional, so you have to block the direction of the attack. Again, some other games, they have a parry button, in which case, as long as you press the parry button, at the exact moment, the parry will be executed, and regardless of the direction the attack is coming from. Again, I'm not listing any games in particular, but that's what a lot of games do. Skyrim, you actually have to block the attack itself, and depending on what the attack is, the block might not be 100% effective. Now, blocking is usually good, but again, Skyrim doesn't just say, oh, just because you press the block button, you're now suddenly, you are not going to take the repercussions of that attack. So depending on what is attacking you, you might still face some repercussions. In those regards, you might be better off dodging. But again, the game gives you tools that allows you to protect yourself, rather than just giving you a simple button that says, oh, I'm going to press the dodge button and somehow I'm invulnerable for a second. And Skyrim doesn't do that. So, now, the second thing is, let's say, range combat. Now, most of the games don't really have fully fleshed out range combat. Skyrim actually does, in the sense that, you have an actual crosshair, you can aim your bow, there's arrows, there's a whole system that Skyrim implemented based on projectiles. Again, a lot of games don't do that. They might just have, a simple shoot a bow button, and you shoot one arrow, and that's it. And the arrow's infinite. Again, it's not really flushed out. Some games you can't even aim. Like, I remember the original Fable, you can't actually aim your bow. You press your bow, the bow kind of just attacks, one target you're kind of selecting. There's no actual aiming reticle, unlike in Skyrim. And to top it off, in Skyrim you also have crossbows. And There's also mods that give you scopes on your bows. Other games, unless your game actually has a fully fleshed out archery system, obviously you can't even make a mod that gives them scopes, because, again, those games don't even aim. So in terms of range combat, Skyrim is better in the sense that most games don't really have fully fleshed out range combat. Okay, let's look at the magic system. Now, most of the games, magic only supplements whatever regular gameplay you're doing. Let's say, melee. Although, let's say in Mass Effect it's a little different, because there's also, I guess they're not technically magic, or whatever you call it. You can use powers to supplement your regular gun shooting. But again, even in those games, the magic is only supplements the primary method of attack, which may be shooting guns or using melee weapons. In Skyrim, it's unique in the sense that you actually have fully flushed out magic schools. Not just one magic school, multiple magic schools. Destruction, you can be a full-on destruction mage and just wail spells at others. Again, you can do that. Oblivion is actually better in this, in the sense of Oblivion, you can make your own spells. You can play a pure destruction mage. Obviously, destruction, you have your single-target projectiles, you have your multi-target projectiles, you also, runes. I've never used them, but again, they're just another method of attack. And, if you want to do that, if you want to just wail fireballs at people, you can do that in Skyrim. Other games don't really let you do that. But again, destruction is only one aspect. Most other games, they just kind of stop at destruction. You can cast a few fireballs, and that's about it. We also have conjuration, which is, again, fully viable as a single school. You can go full conjure. You probably shouldn't, because then you're basically doing nothing for most of the fights. But, conjuration, you can conjure, Atronax, or, Dremor Lords, and have them wail at your enemies. Well, how cool is that? I mean, what other games gives you conjuration? And the only thing I can think of is Divinity Original Sin 2. But Skyrim is actually a bit more fleshed out, in the sense you have tons of different conjurations you can do, given the situations you want to do. And in addition, you can also fight your own conjured creatures by simply attacking them. So, you can summon a Conjurer Lord and duel him in hand-to-hand. You might get your ass kicked, but it's still, again, the fact is, I can do that in Skyrim is so cool. Most of the games, I mean, even if you can conjure stuff, you can't just fight your own summoned creatures, for fun. But you can do that in Skyrim. And not only is it for fun, some people actually use it as a means of training their skills. Some people actually use them as a way of training their own combat skills by, dueling them. But again, I don't recommend it, but the fact is, you have this option. It's so cool. Conjuration is my personal favorite skill in the game. And, that's just fine. But next, we also have illusion magic. Again, illusion is actually totally viable. You can calm your enemies so they don't fight you. You can frenzy them so they attack their own friends. You can, command them and mind control them so that they fight on your side. There's so many cool things you can do with it. I know there's a guy on YouTube I saw that was doing like a full pass of his run where he uses all calm magic and just bypasses every fight. What other games using the option of doing that? I mean, there's some RPGs where you have specific scripted instances, in which case, you can talk your way out of a fight. But in Skyrim, we have entire skill trees dedicated to, hey, let's not fight anyone. Look, there's boss fights where you can literally just sneak past and not fight at all. So you can bypass entire boss fights. What other game lets you do that? Oh, and back to shield blocking. Shields, you can bash with them too, adding another aspect of the game. So if someone's trying to power attack your shield, you can bash them to interrupt their power attack. Again, giving you more options. Now, I'm using Deadly Combat, which, again, quickens the melee combat of the game. But again, even without it, you still have all these options most games don't have. Most games don't even let you have a shield bash option. And most games, defensive moves are just press this button, you're invulnerable for a second. That's not how it works in Skyrim. In Skyrim, you actually have to dodge out of the way of attack. If you're blocking, you actually have to block the enemy attack. You can't just press the block button at an enemy behind you and hope to survive. In addition, Skyrim can be played first person, and in Melee, that's a lot more intense. In addition, obviously, if someone's attacking you from the side, you can't actually see them when you're playing first person. Unlike if you're playing third person, so you can see everybody around you. So you can press, your fancy dodge button to dodge away. You can't do that in Skyrim. Well, you can do that in Skyrim if you're playing third person, but if you're playing first person, you actually have to intelligent positioning to make sure you're not getting flanked. Because, again, your enemies aren't just going to wait and fight one-on-one with you. They're going to just charge straight into your back and just start wailing at you. So you have to make sure you don't get hit by multiple enemies. And Skyrim gives you the tools to accomplish that. You have illusion magic. You have stuff like bend will. You have freeze. You have conjuration. All of which are meant to kind of keep the enemy distracted so you're not forced to fight 5 enemies surrounding you. Now, we have stuff like alteration, which, again, you also have paralysis and stuff to do a lot of crowd controlling stuff. Kind of like what you do in World of Warcraft, where you do have crowd control abilities. And Skyrim does give you some options of that. You have freeze breath, you have paralysis, and of course you have stuff like command and calm. Invisibility lets you disengage and turn invisible again, and hopefully re-enter stealth to, execute more stealth attacks, or just skip entire fights. Again, it gives you options. Now, one interesting thing about Skyrim is that there's a whole run away and kite your enemy while you're casting restoration spells or even potions. And a lot of people say that's kind of like a weak part of the game. And you know what? I'm going to have to disagree with that. I was thinking about that for a second. I was just thinking, how many times have you played like an important fight or a boss fight? In which case, with the first 3 seconds you make a few bad moves, you're down to like 10% health, the boss is at 100, and you're like, you know what, I'm just going to reload.
back to the beginning of the fight, or I'm just let the boss kill me and restart. I'm guessing a lot. That happens to be in a lot of games, where again, you misplay at the beginning, and you realize it's hopeless, and you just let yourself die and reload the game. Because Skyrim gives you the option of surviving every encounter. So even if you're at 10% health and your enemy's at full health, you know, you find 5 enemies with full health and you're at 10% health, you know, you can do things. Let's say running around and cast Restoration to heal yourself up, so you can actually win a fight. This is the only game I've ever played, in which case I've never done the point where, I'm in a point where, I've pretty much lost this fight, I'm gonna reload. This game doesn't encourage me to do that, because again, I always have outs. No matter what happens, I have outs. It gives me more options. Keep in mind, having the player realize he's hopeless and just reload to an earlier save point is kind of bad game design. I mean, there's no reloading in real life. It's not immersive. In Skyrim, you could be in a hopeless situation. You're at 5% health, enemies are super strong, but you have outs. You know, you can kite and cast Restoration. You can cast Invisibility and disengage. You know, you have the outs to kind of recover from that situation and come and fight again without having to reload your game. And I think that is the definition of good game design. It should give you the option of escaping any kind of hopeless situation, allowing you to come back again. Yeah, most fights don't do that. You know, you're in a Legend of Zelda boss fight, you misplayed and you're at, you know, quarter of a heart and your boss is full health, you're gonna just let yourself die and reload to the early point where you restart the boss fight. Not so in Skyrim. Skyrim, you always have outs. You're always given that option of saying, hey look, why don't I drink this potion? Why don't I run? Why don't I cast more spells? Why don't I activate this greater power? So I have the ability to recover from that situation without having to reload the game. And how many times does that happen to you? You know, you're in a desperate situation, you look through your potion list, and you're like, I can drink this fire resist potion. I have this magic potion. Or I have this health potion. You can drink these things and then recover from that fight. You know, go from 5% health to winning the battle entirely. What other game gives you this option? You know, you're in a boss fight in The Witcher 3, and you know, you misplay a bit, and you're at like 10% health. What do? Do you just reload the save? So, you know, people who are saying how Skyrim has weak combat, or how Dark Souls has better combat, Witcher has better combat. I mean, that's ridiculous. Look, in Skyrim, you know, I can cast fireballs, I can shoot people with arrows, I can dodge and block without some cheesy game mechanic. I can use Bend Will, I can conjure creatures, I can cast Invisibility, I can use Calm, Frenzy, I can cast Fear spells. Meanwhile, in some other game, I can, you know, press the dodge button and swing a sword around. I mean, you're telling me that has better combat than Skyrim? That is ridiculous. Skyrim, I'm giving a massive toolkit, massive amounts of options, proper game design without relying on, you know, invulnerability frames from dodge rolling. You know, the only game I can think of maybe that's comparable to Skyrim's combat is something like Monster Hunter, where again, you're also giving a lot of options. You know, monsters are different attacks, but again, even then, I would still say Skyrim gives you a bit more options in the sense that you have more options of disengaging, you have more options of, you know, bypassing fights. But again, Monster Hunter does have good combat, and it's actually fully fleshed out. You know, you have multiple weapon types with completely different effects. You have range combat, you have melee combat, all of which with their own mechanics.
But even in Monster Hunter, the entire looting and equipping system is based on you focusing on one weapon type and not deviating from that and upgrading that weapon type, you know, to as high as possible. So, although you have so many different weapon types, when you're playing Monster Hunter, you're kind of limited to the weapon type you're choosing. Whereas Skyrim, the entire looting system is based around allowing you to kind of do whatever you want, and you're also given different equipment to change up your gameplay. Well, you could be a stealth archer, but you're still going to be looting, you know, melee weapons that allows you to use melee weapons. Again, it might not be the optimal playstyle for your character, but you at least have the freedom to do that whenever you want, which changes up the gameplay.
Okay, so next, I'm going to talk about the sort of game immersion itself. You know, most other games, NPCs are either just a part of cutscenes, or they're just, you know, a statue that stands there, and then the player goes up to them and presses the talk button, in which case the conversation starts. That's how it works in most games. That includes something like Mass Effect. Again, Mass Effect is all about characters. But most characters in Mass Effect, again, they're in cutscenes, otherwise they kind of stay in that one spot where the player can go and speak to them, and they never ever leave that spot, other than for cutscenes. In Skyrim, every character has a schedule, you know, they go to bed, and you can see them eating food, you can see them, you know, cooking, you can see them, you know, using alchemy tables or enchanting. You can see them doing all of these things. And, you know, it feels much, much more immersive, and these characters actually feel like they're alive. A blacksmith. I walk up to a blacksmith and I'm talking to him as he's grinding a sword. I mean, like, this guy actually has an actual job. Like, he has an actual life. And yes, he might not have that much dialogue or that much backstory, but I certainly feel a lot more that he's a real character. You know, a blacksmith in Skyrim, he's not just a vendor for you to talk to. You know, he has a sleeping schedule, he has a house, he has a family probably. You know, his relationships with other characters in the game. And sometimes you see him grinding swords as you're talking to him, or you see him working on the forge. You might see him eating. again, it just feels so much more immersive. After work, a lot of times I'll actually go to the nearby tavern and drink with, other shopkeepers and interact with them. Isn't that really cool? I mean, what other game does that? Again, most games, NPCs just kind of stay in one spot. They never move. In addition, Skyrim characters are actually part of the game world rather than just a statue. I remember once I was just talking to this Khajiit caravan merchant, and all of a sudden, this gargoyle comes by, and then their bodyguard, I think his name is Kajaro, whips out a sword and just charges the gargoyle and starts fighting it. Again, fully dynamic. This is not a scripted cutscene. Some other games might do this with a cutscene, which is you're talking to a character, and then a fight starts. Again, that's part of a scripted cutscene. In Skyrim, this is fully dynamic. I could be talking to someone, all of a sudden, a vampire attacks, and then certain characters will run away and hide. Other characters, like the tough fighter types, actually draw weapons and attack that threat. Fully dynamic. And again, every character has different skill sets. They have different combat moves. So a mage character will start casting spells. Let's say with the card holders win a roll and there's attack, you actually see them casting spells at potential enemies. On the other hand, a melee character will charge in with their sword, and start willing on the enemies. And that just adds so much more to the game. These characters feel alive. They'll actually react to the game world. They'll eat, they'll sleep, they'll react to the game world. And of course, next in Skyrim, we have followers, and it's actually a fully fleshed out system. In Oblivion, you could get people's followers, but the follower system wasn't that fleshed out. But in Skyrim, there's so many different followers. You can equip them different equipment, and they have different skill sets, different fight abilities. Their backstories are kind of weak, and they don't really have that much dialogue. But again, it's still kind of cool where you can go to a tavern, hire a mercenary, and have that mercenary accompany you on a possible battle. I don't really use followers, but again, I can see that as a really cool thing. Mercenaries in Skyrim also feel dynamic, because again, you actually pay them, and they'll accompany you. And they also have different skill sets as well. Most of the games, they don't really have that. You have your sword fighter, you have your axe fighter, and that's about it. In Skyrim, you can have destruction mages, you can have archers, you can have different sort of followers that accompany you. So again, you're telling me Skyrim has weak characters. Well, yes, you can maybe weak from a writing perspective, but these characters actually do feel alive, and they have a lot more going for them than most other games where characters are just a statue for players to speak to. Okay, so next I want to talk about the graphics. Now, Skyrim is a game from 2011, so naturally its graphics are quite a bit weaker than modern games. But that's not entirely true. The first reason for that is obviously immersive HUD. Again, I'm not going to totally complicate EMB mods because it's not for everybody, but immersive HUD, anybody can download it, and it's very, very popular. So, what immersive HUD does is make it so you have no HUD at all. Now, this makes Skyrim look really, really good because there's no distracting HUD that's on the borders that make the game look, well, like a video game. And Skyrim actually feels real, especially when you're in first person. It feels like you're actually in the game world. There's no HUD on the side or compass that tells you where you're going. It's actually really, really cool. So with this, Skyrim actually looks a lot better, even if the graphics are dated. Next, of course, is the fact that Skyrim is in first person. Now, what does this mean? Now, if I go up to a bookshelf, I can actually see the different books. Well, again, I'm using a mod that's, book covers Skyrim, but again, I can see the spines of the books, and they each have, the names of the book, and you can see the book covers on them. And how detailed is that? Most of the games, a bookcase is just a static object. It's just decoration. There's no actual, physical books on that bookcase. But in Skyrim, I can actually read the spine of every single book. I can pick up these books. I can read these individual books. I can collect these books. And yeah, there are players that collect books around Skyrim. And this doesn't go limited to books. I mean, you have different food items. You have mead. You have potions, all of which are a part of the game world that can be interacted with, that can be taken. Again, they're not just a static object meant for decoration. And in addition, the fact is first person means I can see a lot more detail in these objects than games are in third person, even if those games technically are more graphically intensive. Now, even characters themselves. Now, again, I do have character overhaul mods. But one thing is, first of all, you're seeing these characters interact in the game world. You're seeing them eating, and you're making potions or stuff like that. So again, that itself is actually really, really cool. The second thing is when you're talking to them, you can pan your camera. It's not, a fixed cutscene, which gives you a lot more. Kind of, even if you're just in conversation, it makes it a little more interesting because you can kind of pan the camera around and look at the various things in the game. The next thing, of course, is the details on the characters. I mean, if I look at this character, I can see that he has a sword. We can see he's wearing light armor. So again, all of these things make them more interesting. Or maybe there's a barkeep, but she has a dagger on her hip. Again, this kind of small detail does matter, and it makes the game feel more immersive and makes the game more interesting. It makes these characters more interesting. In addition to the buildings themselves, every house has a purpose. It's not just a generic empty house that's just there for decoration. A lot of games, they do that. They have, big empty cities, and, you have all these buildings, but none of them can be interacted with in any way. But in Skyrim, yes, the cities are small, and there's only a few buildings in there, but every single building has a purpose. This is this character's house. There's this character's house. And there's a lot of details in these buildings. You know, from the various food items they have, or some characters might have, you know, secret, you know, drugs or stuff in their basement. Yeah, super cool stuff. Or another character might have a dead body in their basement. Again, all of which adds that character in the game. And every shop is... So, I mean, yes, Skyrim, the characters themselves you're not really getting enough time with these individual characters, and it's a quantity over quality approach, but it's also executed so well. Every character does, you know, they interact with the game world, they do different things. It feels a lot more immersive than just having a guy that stands there, you know, 24/7 for the player to talk to. In addition, you know, because the game is in first person, I can actually get a much more detailed look of characters. This is not that important in the base game, but, you know, when you have mods of character overhaul mods that improve the looks of the characters, it's a lot better. And in addition, most games don't really have a follower system. You have to play the game by yourself. Skyrim, you have a fully fleshed out follower system. In fact, Skyrim, there's also mods that add followers from other franchises and other games into Skyrim, and you're actually spending a lot of time with these characters doing adventure and, you know, completing dungeons that you don't even get in their base games. But all at the player's own choice. If you don't want to have a follower, you don't need a follower. Suppose your character is built as a conjurer, and, you know, you can conjure powerful Dremora lords, but sometimes you just want to whip out a sword and shield and just duel someone one-on-one without using any magic. You know, you can change your gameplay on the fly. On the other hand, you could be, again, a stealth archer. But you know what? I'm going to fight this guy sword to sword, and you can do that. Just because you're playing a certain role, you're running a certain build, does not lock you out of doing other things. A lot of games don't do that. You know, if you play as a mage character, you can't wear any kind of heavy armor. You can't use your battle axe. But damn it. But if I'm playing a mage, sometimes I just want to take a battle axe and just fight someone with it. And other cool stuff you can do. There are also patrols. And again, you might see a group of Imperial Legions, and then you see a bandit attacking you. You lead those bandits into a group of Imperial Legions, and they fight each other. How cool is that? Or you can see two groups of enemies that would fight each other, and have them fight each other, and then you run around them. Why can't I do that in other games? Lead enemies into town guards so they'll take care of them. In fact, that was even a thing back in Oblivion, where you can lead that character, Umbra, into the Imperial City so the Imperial Legion will fight her instead. And of course, she'll kill like a good half of them. But, you know, that was such a cool strategy. Next, of course, is all the cool stuff you can do in Skyrim that you just don't get in other games. Well, let's go for a start. Building your own house. Decorating your own house. You know, have followers. Conjuration magic. Illusion magic. Bend will. How about, you know, soul trapping people you don't like. Black soul gems. You can do that. Necromancy. Oh yeah, you can do that. I mean, Necromancer kind of started out in Diablo 2, but in there you can't do shady stuff. But, you know, if you want to go around Skyrim with a bag full of black soul gems, you can do that. Stealing stuff. Pickpocketing people. There's a fully fleshed out pickpocketing system. You know, you can pay gold to trainers and pickpocket all your gold back. And, you know, all that funny dynamic stuff like hired thug, hired assassins, the courier. You know, transmute all your iron ore into gold and turn them into jewelry, and then enchant this jewelry, maybe with your black soul gems or something, and then sell them to vendors. So, no, you know, it's kind of sad that no game is able to kind of repeat what Skyrim is doing, except for maybe, obviously, the predecessors from Oblivion also had a lot of freedom. Although I think Skyrim is better overall. But, damn, you know, the worst thing about Skyrim is the fact that after playing it, you just don't want to play other games. This is really the ultimate video game. This is beyond a video game. This is just, I can't even describe it. There's so much things you can do in this game. There's so many ways of playing it. People are constantly replaying this game for a reason, because, you know, you're doing this build, and then you try out this other build, and there's a guy who's playing Requiem, like, super hardcore mode. And, like, he spends, like, hours and just doing, like something, the content that will be done in 10 minutes, he's taking hours to do them. But again, he's having a blast to do it. And he's, like, no health, and there's no health regen. So he's desperately looking to buy potions, and he has no gold. Because, again, this is hardcore mode. And, like, it turns Skyrim into this super hardcore survival game.
Okay, so there's a few more reasons why Skyrim is so good. Now, let's say you take a game like, I don't know, Legend of Zelda, and you use a cheat engine to teleport Ganondorf right next to Zelda. What would happen? Absolutely nothing. Because again, there's no actual sort of dynamic AI like that. Bosses in the game are designed purely for the player to fight and the player only. There's no actual dynamicness, so that you can't actually get Zelda to fight Ganondorf. Similarly, you can never get Ganondorf to fight Phantom Ganon or any of the other bosses, because again, that's not coded into the game mechanics. The game is coded only to have the player interact with the boss, and only as a fight. And this is how a lot of games are programmed. Most games, you cannot actually get two enemies to fight each other, or two bosses to fight each other, or a boss to fight an enemy. Skyrim is not, because every single, boss or enemy in the game is, counts as an actor within Skyrim, and they all have their own kind of movesets and their own behaviors. That's why Skyrim, you have so many who would win videos. Again, Skyrim is one of the few games that allows you to do this, because the Skyrim AI has fully flushed out combat mechanics. And, we have a massive amount of fandom dedicated who would win. We had, Deadly Combat, who would win. Because we all want to see, two big bads fight each other. Skyrim is one of the few games that unlocks this. So how does this affect regular gameplay exactly? Well, first things first, this unlocks conjuration mechanics and follower mechanics. Because every actor in the game, may that be a boss, an NPC, or a wolf, all have their own combat mechanics. This is why Skyrim also has a massive amounts of different kind of followers. I mean, you have NPC types where you can equip them, you have conjuration, so conjure Dromora lords, you have wolf followers, even troll followers. And to make it better off, is that this integrates super well with mods. So if you want a mod that you can conjure a Dwarven Centurion to fight for you, you can do that. How about conjuring a werewolf, or Master Vampire, or a dragon, or even Alduin himself? Again, the game allows you to do this. Even in the game, we had Call Dragon, which allows us to call a dragon to help us. Very few other games are allowed to do this because in most games, enemies, they're only coded to interact with the player and the player only. In fact, they don't even have mechanics in which they can fight other NPCs or town guards. Again, those aren't even coded into the game. They can only fight and interact with the player. And this is part of the reason why you can see so many different cool things in Skyrim, such as bandits and fighting stormcloaks, or some random vampire fighting a giant. Again, we have that in Skyrim because Skyrim is coded to have this doable. So in a sense, Skyrim is really the greatest kind of video game crossover in a sense. I mean, what other games can you play that would allow, a dragon to fight a giant, or a werewolf to fight a troll, or a vampire to fight the Imperial Legion? Like, I can't think of any other game that gives this much dynamic interactions. Again, anything can fight anything in Skyrim. Now, if there are other games that does this, I would love to know. Remember, in most games, monsters and enemies are only coded to interact with the player, and only the player alone. But in Skyrim, anything can happen. So I'm giving a lot of praises for Skyrim and how much options you have and how much toolkits you have. So some critics might argue that, there's a quantity over quality approach. And that's not true. So let's look at melee combat. Melee combat is generally the mainstay of most sort of fantasy, medieval era RPGs. So melee gameplay is probably the most important aspect of these action games. Look how in-depth Skyrim's melee combat is. First of all, Skyrim has weapon reach. Most games don't give you weapon reach for melee weapons. So Skyrim, you can actually zone out melee enemies using a longer reach weapon, and it's an effective tactic. And you can do that in real life. Skyrim also has shield bashing, where the shield is not just a defensive equipment, it's also good as an offensive equipment. Skyrim's dodge mechanics involves physically moving out of the way of attacks. There's no cheesy invulnerability frames. You dodge by actually dodging. You can ensure power attacks with shield bashes or weapon bashes. So Skyrim's melee combat is actually very well developed and very well executed. It gets improved with mods. Like I'm using Deadly Combat, which adds stuff like time blocking, and other mechanics that improves. Even regular Skyrim has that's far deeper than most other RPGs. So no, Skyrim is not doing the quantity over quality approach. Just on melee combat, Skyrim is done well in depth. And again, I've already explained magic earlier, where Skyrim has multiple trees of magic that are each fully developed and each viable. So again, what other game is giving you this option? You have games that can let you throw fireballs, but can you just, calm entire groups of enemies to bypass fights? No, you can do that in Skyrim. There's other games with conjuration. But can you fight your own conjured creatures in duels? Again, Skyrim gives you that option.
So next I want to talk about is repetitiveness. Now, what makes a game repetitive? Okay, so I'm going to use Witcher 3 as an example. Witcher 3, I have a sword and I have some dispels. But what I'm ultimately forced to do in the game is fight every single enemy I encounter. Even skipping enemies is really, really difficult in the game. Now that can get really repetitive. That doesn't really happen in Skyrim. In Skyrim, you have conjuration, you have stealth, and so which turns every encounter to be much more dynamic. So, in the first room, there might be 5 enemies, but I might be able to stealth kill 2 of them, so I only have to fight 3 of them at once. I might be able to stealth kill all of them and not fight anybody, or I might just skip every single enemy. Or I'm going to use conjuration to reduce the amount of fights I have to do. I don't have to sword and board every single enemy every single time. Because if I have to do that, that gets repetitive fast. See, Skyrim is unique in the sense that I can choose to play the game however I want, whenever I want, at any moment I want. It's not even a matter of creating a character build that allows me to do certain things. Even if I build a character in one way, and again, I said earlier, I can be a super powerful conjurer, with whatever magic. But, sometimes I just want to fight someone sword to sword. Again, Skyrim doesn't lock me out of doing that. The fact that I'm playing a conjurer doesn't mean I cannot use a sword and shield and fight someone. Similarly, just because I'm fighting sword and shield doesn't mean I don't have other options of playing the game to reduce the amount of actual fights I do. May that be taking a follower, or dipping into conjuration, or even using, destruction staffs. Because sometimes I might not want to go into melee with someone, and I just want to throw fireballs at them with like a destruction staff. I can do that in Skyrim. Most people play the game with a few different toolkits at their disposal, so they're not locked into just one. Because ultimately, if you're locked into exactly one playstyle, like in most other games, where again, you're just a guy with a sword, then that can get really repetitive. So Skyrim doesn't do that because, again, I'm given the option to change up my gameplay on the fly and play the game as I need to, as I want to. I wish for the day where a game can overtake Skyrim, but I don't think that's ever going to happen. We're probably going to be playing this game forever. The next thing I'm hoping for is like a mod for Skyrim that gives us full split-screen co-op. There's obviously online co-op. Again, it's actually hard to do, and in addition, there's the problem with mods, because every player is different mods, and there's going to have tons of conflict with that. But local split-screen co-op is also a problem, because obviously you only have one copy of the game, and that's what I want to see in Skyrim. Yeah, no. Skyrim is still the best game ever made.